All right, as states clamp down on those ESG practices, the federal government could be clamping down on a different area of the muni market, and that is tax-free university bonds. The Republican sweep in the November U.S. election is threatening a niche tax break that helps American colleges upgrade their campuses, well, at a cheaper rate. Joining us now is Chuck Samuels. He is a Mintz Levin counsel to state bond issuing authorities for nonprofits. Good to speak with you. I guess the first question here I'd have to ask is, give us a sense of the scale of things, Chuck. How many universities, nonprofit schools, colleges, universities, or private schools are able to sell these tax-free bonds for something like upgrading their facilities?
Thank you for having me on. Thousands of colleges and universities, including very small ones, technical schools, career academies, are able in a variety of ways to access the market at reasonable prices through tax-exempt bonds. Of course, there are very large universities, public and private, who use that marketplace as well, but it is very widespread.
And the fear here is that the federal government will try to close this tax break, remove it, because they need to raise funds for the other items on their economic agenda. You work as a counsel to the National Association of Health and Educational Facilities Finance Authorities. What's the response from that group?
We believe that it makes no sense to place a burden on the cost of higher education in order to pay for other, even very important, tax priorities. We also disagree with any notion that some of the social policy and political controversies between academia and the government or even the greater community should be the basis for retaliation through restrictions on the use of tax-exempt bonds for higher education. We think those things should be totally separated out. We have an existing system that supports the greatest university system nationwide in the world, the envy of the world, and we would not want to undermine that and make it much more difficult and expensive, particularly for smaller institutions, to be able to improve their physical plant and their equipment and provide a better environment for their students.
Chuck, I am curious, though. I mean, what is the likelihood that this change would actually even happen? I mean, my general understanding of the legislative process to sort of change something like this, it just doesn't seem like whatever rhetoric's coming out of Washington, it doesn't seem like they would have the votes for this, or do they?
Well, one would hope not, but we have to take into account that in 2017, legislation even broader than this was passed by the House of Representatives, but fortunately was stopped in the Senate. Second, many of the conservative think tanks and the papers that they always develop for the new administration have proposed very broad restrictions on tax-exempt bonds. So we certainly hope that we're not going to see these type of proposals, but the community, the municipal finance community and the higher education community need to be prepared for the debate.
I am curious, Chuck. I know it's your job to sort of make sure that this doesn't happen, but let's say we do get a rescission of these tax-exempt allowabilities for these bonds here. What then becomes of the industry? What then becomes of some of these municipalities? Do they have other options?
In many cases, smaller, less creditworthy institutions, and if it applies to governments will have to defer very important expenditures, and in other cases, they will become much more debt and cost burdened. And this is in the face of a major thrust of the new administration, which will be to support reshoring in the United States, which requires exactly the infrastructure, both in the private sector and the public sector, that tax-exempt financing facilitates.
All right, Chuck, great stuff, and really appreciate you taking time to be with us today. Here for our Muni Moment, Chuck Samuels, the Mintz Levin counsel to state bond issuing authorities for nonprofits. A closer look at some of the rhetoric coming out of Washington that could potentially maybe get rid of tax-exempt status for several municipal bonds.